Our interview this morning is with Wesley Blake. Wesley was born in Stephenville, Texas, February of 1942. He served in the United States Navy from September of 1961 through September of 1965. Highest rank attained was Seaman. This interview is conducted at Burleson, Texas on Friday, August the 13th, year 2010. My name is Dale Dexheimer. I'm not related to Mr. Blake in any way. Also in the room is Milton Gibson. Milton is our videographer. This interview is conducted for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress and Operation Remember at the City of Burleson. And with that intro, Wesley, we'll let you tell us about your career in Uncle Sam's Navy.
Yeah, I had a real good reason for joining the Navy. Number one, I'd always wanted to go in the Navy as a kid. And then one day I got in an argument with my mother, and I thought, well, I'll just show her, I'll go join the Navy. If she was still alive today, she would still be laughing because the joke was on me, not her. I went to boot camp in San Diego. From San Diego, I was stationed aboard the USS Buck DD 761. It was, at that time, it was stationed in Long Beach. It was going through an overhaul, and they were adding the DASH program, which is a drone anti-submarine helicopter that they were putting on. Well, as a matter of fact, I think we're the only ship that ever wound up getting it. I think that's true. Spent about a year there. So I considered that shore duty. After that, we spent the rest of my time at sea. We were stationed out of San Diego, which is the port we run out of all the time. I ran up and down the West Coast as far as Seattle. We went to Seattle during the World's Fair. Having the only DASH system in the fleet, we got to tie up at all the #1 piers, which was sometimes be right. They always considered Broadway piers. So you could walk right into town. I mean, we felt like we were the elite for some reason. Anyway, made 2 trips to Vietnam in 1963 and again in 1965. A couple of things that happened during those cruises as far as outstanding is when we were coming back in 1963. We were about 2 days out of San Diego, and all of a sudden we come to a dead halt, and nobody knew what was going on. And the captain passed the word that President Kennedy had been assassinated. So then we all thought we were fixing to go to war with Russia because we just knew that's who killed the president. Finally, we got the word to come on into San Diego. The other thing that happened on one of our cruises, it was a cruise in 1965, we were almost to Pearl Harbor, and we were running with a cruiser. And we were refueling from the cruiser, and I just walked into midships passageway, and all of a sudden I'm hanging on for dear life, and I'm looking out the doorway. I'm looking at the bottom of the cruiser and looking at the ocean going by. I look back up the other doorway, and I'm looking at the sky. We had rammed the cruiser, tore a hole in the cruiser and a hole in our ship. And when we pulled into Pearl Harbor, it looked like the mafia was waiting on our captain. I never saw so many long black Cadillacs and all that gold from the officers' uniforms glowing in the sun. We figured, and seriously, when he stepped off and stepped on that pier, they completely surrounded him, and we thought we would never see him again. However, he did come back. That was in 1965. Our captain we had on our first cruise was an excellent captain. I mean, this guy, we got efficiency on everything we did. And our second captain, I don't know where he come from, but it was something else. We saw quite a bit of action when we were in Vietnam. We would pull up in the coves at night, which I never really cared for because I always felt like they could blow us out of the water. And we would fire support, we would fire star shell, and then we would fire live rounds once we got our directions on where to fire. There's 3 people who can see out of a gun. I was in the forward gun mount. That was my GQ station. There are 3 people who can see out of a gun mount: a pointer, a trainer, and the gun captain. When the star shell would go off, sometimes we were so close that I could see people running around, and it was really freaky because I often wondered who was who and who knew who was going where. It looked like ants. I never saw such a commotion in my life every time one of those star shells went off. Sometimes I was amazed at how many rounds we did fire. These were 5-inch 38 projectiles. When we'd climb out of that mount in the morning, there was all the casings on that bow of the ship, and it just didn't seem like we fired that many rounds, but we did. And we stopped a bunch of, actually they were fishing boats, little fishing boats, and then we would call all the ships when they were overseas along the Vietnam coast had a Vietnamese officer aboard for interpreter. And he would yell commands at these fishing boats, and every now and then one would pull away from us, and when they did, he would run up on the signal bridge and cock that .50 caliber we had mounted up there, and they never pulled away again. Of course, our captain was right behind him, grabbing him all the way, because he was afraid he was going to fire, and those people are crazy enough to do it. We got a call one time to report to this rock, and it was a rock. It was a big rock, but it was about 300 or 400 yards off the coast, and they had 3 North Vietnamese trapped on this rock. Now, I don't know how they got there. Anyway, they called us. The South Vietnamese Navy, it looked like toy ships is what it looks like. It looks like you could play with them. But they were still too big to get to this rock. So they borrowed our captain's gig and got to the rock. They killed one of the North Vietnamese aboard the rock, on the rock. They brought the other 2 down. They took the first one, made him kneel down at the back of the captain's gig, and this officer pulled out a .45, stuck it right between his eyes, asked him a question, and this guy, couldn't believe it, shook his head no. He immediately blew his head off, never asked him another question. He got the second one down, and I thought, well, this second one will definitely talk. He asked him a question, he shook his head no, same thing. So, I mean, we saw quite a bit of action over there. It was unreal. Guess I'm kind of out of something right now. We pulled our liberties in Hong Kong. The longest we ever stayed out before we went to Liberty was 48 days. And believe me, that's a long time at sea. You'll be standing along at the side of the ship, leaning on a lifeline, and your best friend will come up and stand beside you, and it will make you so mad you can't spit. Because you've been at sea so long. One time we pulled into Hong Kong, and it was the time we'd been out 48 days. And 2 days later, the carrier pulled in, and they'd been out for 63 days. Well, when you're out at sea that length of time, you have money because you haven't spent it anywhere. And the admiral had put the word out that if they didn't behave, if anybody acted up, he would pull right back out for another 63 days. Well, 2 sailors got drunk and robbed a cab driver. Now, I guarantee you a cab driver probably doesn't ever have more than $4 at a time on them. And they weren't like you were thinking a cab driver. They were like rickshaw drivers, but they were called cab drivers. Anyway, they robbed this cab driver, and the admiral was true to his word. He hoisted anchor, pulled right back out, stayed out another 63 days. The word was out that they had to lock those 2 sailors up to keep the rest of the crew from killing them. And I believe that, believe me. What was, I guess, kind of ironic about when I went in the Navy, when I first reported aboard the ship, like I said, it was going through an overhaul, and it was tied up to a pier. It was completely being tore apart. And when I got out of the Navy, we were in a dry dock in San Francisco, And it was kind of strange that it was in these two circumstances that I entered and left. We were on our way to San Francisco, and we hit something and tore up one of the props, is why we were in dry dock. And the only thing they ever figured out that we hit, that it had to be a weld. Now, that was not proven, so it's just a guess, you know. I enjoyed my time in the Navy. A lot of times I wished I'd have stayed in. And then when I think of some of the things I've done on the outside, I'm glad I got out. And I guess I'm just about through talking.
Okay. Very good, sir. Make a note here. I've got a number of questions here, Wesley, and really you've answered some, but let me go into these a little bit. Your battle station, you were in Mount 51, I guess they would call it?
Forward gun mount.
Forward gun mount. You had one twin 5-inch 38 up forward?
Right.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to be in that mount. How'd you get in there?
Well, you had to climb through it was like a little hatch. And then naturally it's sealed once you're in there. And like I said, there's only 3 people who can see out. There's also only 3 people who can hear what's going on. Those same 3 people wear headphones. And there'd be long periods of time before we would fire. And you're sitting there almost asleep, and everybody else is having to stand up. There's no place for them to sit down. And all of a sudden I would hear a beep, a real faint beep, beep, and that meant the gun was fixing to fire. And it shook the other guys up because they wasn't aware we were fixing to fire, and all of a sudden this loud boom went off. You were in there, it was compact. As a matter of fact, I sat between the bulkhead of the mount and the barrel itself. Okay.
How big is the inside of this mount?
Oh, maybe 10 feet wide. Maybe it was a 10 by 10, and that's just a rough guess.
Get warm in there?
You know, it didn't for some reason. Because we were in there at night, and I guess that's what helped us. Is that we were in there at night.
You mentioned firing a star shell.
Yes.
What is a star shell? What's the purpose of a star shell?
The purpose of a star shell, once it goes off, believe me, it's like the sun just popped up. Everything lights up, and it's just like daylight, only it's at midnight, let's say, and you can see everything that's moving. It's daylight. Once that shell goes off, it is daylight.
And you use that so that you could fire your high explosive rounds.
Right. We got the coordinates where to fire after that.
You mentioned that you were in the yard when you went on board for a FRAM?
FRAM.
Right.
Don't ask me what that stands for, but that's a Navy term for overhaul. I never found out what FRAM stood for.
Did you ever fly the helo? Did the ship ever fly the
Oh,
helo?
yes. It never saw action as far as what it was designed for, but they would fly it all the time just to make sure it would work.
What was it designed for?
To drop torpedoes on submarines. That's exactly what it was designed for.
Anti-submarine
Yes.
helicopter.
Right.
How big was this helicopter? Have any people in it, Wesley?
No, it was strictly remote control.
All radio control. Okay.
It was a good-sized little heli. It was a lot bigger than. It's probably not as big as the drones they're using nowadays. You know, the drones they use over in Iraq right now, Iraq and Afghanistan. Pardon me. It wasn't that big, but it was good size. You didn't have any trouble seeing it, let's put it that way.
Okay. You said your battle station, your general quarter station was up there in that forward gun mount.
Right.
What were your regular duties on board?
While we were overseas, people liked me and hated me. My duties were to have that store open 1 hour a day in the morning, 1 hour a day in the afternoon. If we were in port, I only had to open it 1 hour during the morning. The rest of the time was mine. Now, everybody else was doing 4 and 4. They would stand watches for 4 hours, do cleanup for 4 hours, and then right back on watches. And they were always bitching, why didn't I have to stand a watch? And they said, well, that's just the nature of his job, you know. There were 3 jobs on the order of mine. That was the postal clerk and the barber. We were all, the postal clerk was next door to me, the barber was right in front of my store, and everybody kind of hated us and liked us at the same time just because we didn't have to stand watches. We could do what, as a matter of fact, I spent most of my off time hanging out up on the signal bridge because you can see everything that's going on. The bridge is right below you, and the captain usually either stayed to the left or right of the bridge. He had chairs on both sides, and you heard all the orders that were being given, and you always knew what was going on if you were up on the signal bridge. As a matter of fact, the signalmen were constantly after me to learn how to do signals, but I was smarter than that to learn because I knew what would happen if I did. Not only that, I don't really know if I was smart enough to learn to do that. Man, that was something else, those dots and dashes.
You ran the ship's store. Since I was in the Navy, I know what
about the size of a closet. However, it had shelves that went all the way up about 7 or 8 feet. And I had watches, I had toiletries, I had candy, just general things of this nature. I always had it made when everybody was always worried whenever we were going to have an inspection. I knew how to get by the captain and the executive officer. Whenever the door would open, you know, would kind of be a split door. And I had a little ledge there where I'd place whatever items people were wanting to buy. I'd place it on that ledge. Well, as soon as the captain and executive officer, I could see them when they come around the passageway, I would lay a Hershey's with almonds on that tray. They would walk up, look in, pick the candy up, put it in their pocket, and say, it looks good, go on down. So I never worried about inspections. One thing that did happen to me in the Navy, my darling mother, one day I got the word the executive officer wanted to see me, and they said he wants to see you in his stateroom right now. So I hightailed it in there, and I couldn't imagine what he wanted. And he showed me a letter from Jim Wright, who was a senator. And he said, read this letter. And my mother had written Jim Wright, wanting to know why her son didn't have time to write home. And anyway, the executive officer said, you will write a 10-page letter right now. You will be informative, you will be apologetic, and you will promise your mother you will write home every week, in which I did the rest of my time in the Navy.
Ship store, Wesley. Were you responsible for the inventory? Did you have to reorder things?
Yes, I did. I had like 3 storerooms. They weren't warehouses. They were storerooms below decks. I never really liked going down in it. It's the only thing I hated about my job was going down in those storerooms. Even at night in my bunk, a destroyer in the Navy is also known as a tin can. And when you're laying in your bunk at night, you can hear the ocean swishing by. It's like there's nothing between you and there. It'd be like glass. And even when you're below deck, I always thought if we hit something, or if somebody blew a hole in the ship, I'd be gone. They'd never know what happened to me. So that's the reason I never did like going down in the storerooms.
When you went alongside this cruiser to refuel and somehow the two ships got together, did you feel any bang?
Oh yeah, that's why I immediately grabbed I don't remember what was on the bulkhead, but there was something there, or I'd have been gone. I'm telling you, because the ship rocked, I mean, I was holding and my feet were out, and I was like this. And I looked up like see what was happening. That's when I saw the ocean. That's when I saw the sky, and it was freaky, man. I mean, it scared me. I didn't know what had happened at that time because I was in midship passageway. And then when we were breaking away, I saw the hole in the bow of that, well, it wasn't really the bow of that ship. It was toward the front, though.
And you lose anybody over the side?
No.
No?
No. You might find this hard to believe. We were plane guarding up around San Francisco one night. It was during the night, and it was rough seas. And this plane landed aboard the carrier, and believe it or not, they directed it off the side of the ship. And the pilot was still in it. And so we got a lifeboat in the water, and to that pilot, we luckily found him before they could get a helicopter off that carrier to come down and find that pilot. So he spent the night aboard our ship, and it was a Marine pilot, it wasn't a Navy pilot. And so the next morning back on the Fantail, we were having this big meeting, you know, everybody that's not on watch or duty, come back here for this meeting. And so this Marine officer got up there and he said, I want to thank you for picking me out of the water. And he said, I want to apologize for my haircut. Now that was his big speech, and it just, it flew all over me. Here we saved him, and he did thank us for that. But then to sit there and apologize for his haircut was just a little too much.
Was his haircut bad?
No, it looked like a jarhead to me. It was all shaved off, but he was apologizing for it. Why, I don't know. But it's hard to believe, and that happened twice. The other time we were over Vietnam, and an F-8U Crusader took off, and just as he got up to the level where you would think they would take off, you heard two booms. And I was looking right at it when it happened. I was on the signal bridge. He ejected out of the plane, and that plane disintegrated the minute he ejected out. The plane stalled just as he got to a certain altitude, and he knew there was a problem. So he ejected out. Well, he wasn't high enough for the chute to fully open, but it did keep him from killing himself when he hit the water. And again, we got a boat in that water and got to him, but about then the helicopter got there and they flagged our crew off. Well, we were watching this, so the helicopter starts picking him up and his parachute is still attached to him. Well, when he got closer up, here comes the parachute, almost gets into the blades. Somebody got smart enough to cut that chute off of him. I don't know if he was stunned, I don't know what happened there, but he didn't get the chute off himself, and it almost took that helicopter down. But that's twice that we almost rescued the second pilot before a helicopter got to him. To this day, I've never understood how that happened. But it's quite a little rigmarole. I wasn't a bosun mate, so I don't really know how to explain it all. But it's not easy putting that boat in the water. You just don't push a button and it goes down. You've got to put it in the water. And then you've got to get to where the pilot is, you know. So it was something else.
You did have some excitement, didn't you?
Yes, we did. We did see excitement.
You said that you had liberty in Hong Kong. Half the ship go over at one time, I guess?
Yes, that's what happened to the carrier. Only half a crew gets to go at a time. I guess if an emergency come up, they have to have enough to get that ship underway if they don't have time to, which I can't imagine that happening, but it could, I guess.
What do you think about Hong Kong?
Hong Kong was a rat hole. That was one of the nastiest places I've ever been in my life. As a matter of fact, I got to where I wouldn't even go over, to tell you the truth. I'd just stay aboard ship. It was so bad when I was there.
You ever have liberty any other places?
not when we were touring Vietnam. I did go to Japan, Okinawa, the Philippines, Guam. I guess that's about it as far. Kaohsiung, went to Kaohsiung. That's basically places we went.
Of those places, you didn't like Hong Kong. Of the places that you did visit, Wesley, was there one that stood out as being a better Liberty port or a better town or city than the others?
To be honest with you, no. I don't know what it is. I just didn't care for those places over there. I remember being in Long Beach, and shortly after I got out of boot camp, I heard that these fleet of tugboats were going to Sasebo, Japan, and they were going to be stationed there for 2 years. And I went over to see if I could trade out with any other sailors who didn't want to go, but it didn't work out. And I remember at the time being upset that nobody wanted to trade, because I thought going to Japan would be neat. Well, once I got to Japan, I discovered I didn't like the Japanese and they didn't like me. And so I thought, man, how lucky was I not to get stationed aboard a tug going over there for 2 years. Here again, whenever we pulled into Liberty in Japan, I stayed aboard the base. I would not go over.
Born in Stephenville, I assume you grew up in Fort Worth?
Yes.
So here you are, always walking around on dry land. They take you to San Diego, run you through boot camp, and then they put you on USS Buck, DD 761. What do you think about that first time you went to sea? You'd never been to sea before, obviously.
No, and I'll tell you something that tickled me. It's just a little thing that I like. There were plenty of times, I can honestly say, I never got seasick. And there I was a boot. Of course, I'd been in it almost a year then, but still I was considered a boot. And I had galley duty. And all I had to do was put potatoes in this machine that would peel them. It was like a giant mixer or something. And so I thought, well, I don't want to do that. So I faked being seasick, and this cook come down, took one look at me. He started laughing. He said, I can tell you're not seasick. He said, get your butt up to that galley and get those potatoes peeled. So I started laughing, and I never faked it again after that. But there was plenty of times when there would only be at the most 5 of us eating, because that whole ship was sick. This might bother some people, but we had this one officer, and everybody liked this officer, but they laughed at him every time we got underway if we hit rough seas. He had a bucket up on the bridge, and as the ship rolled this way, the bucket would roll with him, and he would puke on this side. Then they would go the other side. He would puke on that side. And this bucket just stayed with him. It was like it was attached to him. And we would die laughing at this poor guy. And I mean, I'm talking guys been here 15, 20 years, where you could look at them and see they were green. And another thing, whenever you've been at sea a long time, and you get off and you're walking down a pier, and the sailors in front of you, they're all walking like this. They're not walking straight. You think you're walking straight, but when you see a group in front of you, every one of them will be like this. You cannot stand up straight after you've been on a ship at sea a long time.
We go to a different subject here, Wesley. When you went up to the Rock, they shot the one North Vietnamese, or they killed him somehow, on the Rock, brought 2 down into the whaleboat, captain's gig, whatever, and shot 2 there. There were U.S. Navy personnel on this whaleboat, right?
No. We got it in the water, and this little, it's a miniature ship to me, but anyway, they come out, and their crew took it to the Rock. We did not let our captain wouldn't let our crew go over there. The interpreter from our ship went. The officer, he was on it, but it was all South Vietnamese on that captain's gig. And that's what upset my captain. He didn't realize this was going to happen. And I mean, he was jumping up and down right after, you know, when they brought it. He was constantly raising hell with this Vietnamese officer because they're two totally different people, you know. Vietnamese are just about any nationality. They're real quick-tempered. They don't think. They just react. And like I said, he'd run up there sometimes, cock that 50 caliber. Our captain just knew he was going to cut loose, and you don't know who those people are in that boat, you know.
This when the South Vietnamese shot these two guys, I guess just 45.
45. He pulled a 45 out of his holster and asked them one question. I mean, we were this close that we could actually see and hear what was going on. Now, I don't know what he asked them because it was in Vietnamese. But he only asked them one question. It didn't take him but a second to ask them, and they both shook their head no, and they shouldn't have, because that was the end of it.
What'd they do with the bodies?
They took them.
They took.
Yeah, I don't know what they did with them.
Okay. You mentioned after being at sea for 48 days, when you went into port somewhere, you had a pocket full of money. Got paid in cash, right?
Yes.
Came down on the mess decks, and that guy started rolling those 20s out.
Right.
So you were a seaman with 3 years active. You were getting combat pay being over there, weren't you?
Right.
Okay.
But I don't remember what it was.
You don't? Okay, that was my next
No,
question.
I have no earthly idea what that was.
Okay. I guess I've got one last one here, Wesley. You spent 4 years in the Navy. Did you ever use any of your training, your Navy training, once you got back on dry land, became a civilian?
No, I didn't. I just always had different jobs that didn't pertain to, like, selling, you know, or running a store of any kind. Or actually, I could run a press, you know, and I've never done that even.
So you did your 4 years. You enjoyed your 4 years, but you were ready to get out when the time came.
Strictly because I never got advanced after passing that third-class test. That's what irritated me. And they kept saying, well, you've got all these lifers in here, and they don't get out. You know, once, like I said, the Filipinos and the black people, when they get in there, they don't get out. And it was hard to advance. Now then, I took the racket versus the rate, is what you might as well say. Because I saw people come in way after me, make second, in other divisions, you know, not in supply. And that always irritated me, and so I just could not see myself staying in. Waiting 10 years to make third class is what it seemed like.
Well, sir, I thank you for the time this morning.
Well, sure.
You had some really exciting things happen. You saw a lot.
Yeah.
We appreciate your time this morning and your time in the service, Wesley. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.